This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
This is the Talking Animal Law podcast, brought to you every 2 weeks by the UK Centre for Animal Law and hosted by Paula Sparks, Director of A-Law. But it's not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who cares about animals. So no matter who you are, if you want to know more about animal protection, news, ethics and animal law reform, then this is the podcast for you.
I'm very pleased to welcome today a colleague of mine at the Centre for Animal Welfare at Winchester University, Dr Steven McCulloch, who is a veterinary surgeon and expert in animal welfare. In 2022, Dr McCulloch wrote a report for the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation called Banning Farrowing Crates in the UK, Transitioning to Free Farrowing to Meet the Welfare Needs of Pigs. He joins us today to talk about the report and the legal and welfare issues around farrowing crates. Steve, thank you for joining us today and talking about your research around farrowing crates.
Thanks for the invitation, Paula.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Before we talk about the issues highlighted in your research, can you just explain for our listeners what farrowing crates are and how commonly they are used in pig farming?
Sure. So farrowing crates are metal cages. They measure about 2 meters in length by about 60 centimeters in width and 60 centimeters in depth. And they have a footfall or area of around 1.2 meters squared. And these crates, these metal enclosures, sit within a larger pen, which is about 4 meters squared. The purpose of the crate, the metal enclosure, is to separate the sow from her piglets, and the pen, the piglets area, if you like, around it, has a creep with a heat source and permits management to separate the sow and her piglets. So pigs are kept in crate from 1 week prior to farrowing until the piglets are weaned at around 4 weeks of age. And so pigs are kept in crates for about 5 weeks for each litter. Farrowing crates cause the greatest degree of confinement of any farming system in the UK or the European Union. The pigs are able to stand up and lie down, but they're not able to turn around. And you could think of the situation being similar for a human, being stood up in a traditional public telephone box for 5 weeks at a time. And indeed, we'd probably have a lot more room than the sow does. And finally, sows farrow 2.3 times each year. They have a gestation length of 115 days and they farrow 2.3 times a year. And so they're kept in these crates for about 80 days each year, meaning 22% of their adult breeding lives.
I think it's one of those areas, that was a really helpful description, but exemplifies, a picture speaks 1,000 words. When you see sows in these farrowing crates, I think you get a real perspective on how narrow they are in relation to the size of the sow. So what's the difference between a farrowing crate and a sow stall?
So it's a good question because there's a lot of confusion, I think, particularly they're very similar systems. Sow stalls have been banned or partially banned in some places. But first of all, farrowing crates, again, metal cages, 2 meters by 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters within this larger pen. And just to talk about how common the crates are first, in the UK, 60% of the pig herd farrows indoors, and almost all indoor pig units use these farrowing crates. And so this means about 200,000 sows are kept in crates in the UK. Globally, farrowing crates are ubiquitous. They're very common. So farrowing crates tend to be used in the UK, the European Union, and globally, such as in the US. To go back to compare these to stalls, and stalls are also known as gestation crates in the UK, the metal enclosure is effectively very, very similar. The stall is a metal cage with very similar dimensions to the crate, so that she can stand up and lie down, but she can't turn around. But the sow stall is just a simple metal enclosure without the outer pen, and it's used for the pig's pregnancy. So, for example, in the United States, where these stalls or gestation crates are used throughout pregnancy, the pigs will be inseminated, and then they'll be put in the crates, and then they'll spend the duration of their 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days pregnancy in the stall. And just before they farrow, about a week before, they'll be moved to a farrowing crate. And again, very similar situation for them, very confined area. They'll farrow, the pigs will farrow, and then again, they'll be put back into these stalls. So the European Union has a partial ban on sow stalls. So these are to keep pigs in during their pregnancy, and that ban was effective from 2013. And the ban means that pigs can only be kept in the stall during their pregnancy for the first 4 weeks. So European Union pigs will be inseminated, put into these stalls for 4 weeks, taken out of the stalls into group housing for a couple of months, and then they'll be put in the farrowing crate a week before farrowing. In the UK, there's been a full ban on sow stalls since 1999. And of course, this ban and the partial ban in the European Union was based on, substantial evidence that these stalls cause substantial suffering to sows.
Can you tell us more about the welfare impacts of farrowing crates on pregnant and lactating sows?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, to discuss the welfare impacts, it's important to say something about the natural behavior of pigs. And pigs are very sentient, very highly intelligent animals. They explore their environments by rooting and digging. They have very sensory noses. They live in social groups. They interact with other sows and piglets. And pregnant sows in particular have a very strong motivation to build a nest prior to farrowing. So in the wild, sows will actually travel miles to find a suitable nest site that's away from the other pigs. Then they'll build a nest, which is kind of like a concave hollow in the ground from sticks and branches and leaves and other bits of vegetation. And it's important to note that early animal welfare studies have shown that even domesticated pigs that we've selected over thousands of years still retain these highly motivated internal innate behaviors. But to go back to the welfare impacts and the suffering that these crates cause, so the most obvious one is just based on the severe restriction. And again, these crates constitute the most severe form of confinement of farm animal systems in the UK and the European Union. So the sows are unable to move around. They're unable to turn around even. They're not able to explore their environment. They're standing on a hard, slatted floor, so they have no environmental enrichment, no straw for nesting material. They're not able to root or dig. They're not able to interact with their piglets. They're unable to build a nest, which causes frustration. And the prolonged lying on the hard floors causes sores on their limbs and their shoulders. And these sows even show abnormal stereotypic type behaviors like chewing on the bars.
In fact,
So,
in your report, you write that farrowing crates are not compatible, or arguably not compatible, with the principles of the Animal Welfare Act of 2006 and the Welfare of Farmed Animals England regulations of 2007. And indeed, that they're not compliant potentially with this legislation. Can you just explain a little more about that?
absolutely. So Section 9 of the Animal Welfare Act confers a duty on keepers to ensure the welfare needs of animals and under their care. And I think, again, if we, conceptualize the farrowing crate and the degree, and indeed the sow stall, for the more global context, and think about the degree of confinement, it's fairly self-explanatory that these systems can't meet the welfare needs. But under Section 9, the welfare needs are categorized as the need for a suitable environment, the need for a suitable diet, the need to exhibit normal patterns of behavior, the need to be housed with or apart from other animals, the need to be protected from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. And in my report, I found that the farrowing crate violates all 5 of these welfare needs, and therefore the farrowing crates aren't consistent with the Animal Welfare Act. In terms of the welfare of farmed animals, England regulations and this parallel legislation in other parts of the UK, Schedule 1 states that the freedom of movement of animals must not be restricted in such a way as to cause them unnecessary suffering or injury. Schedule 1 then goes on to state that when animals are continuously confined, for example, like in the farrowing crate context, they must be given the space appropriate to their physiological and behavioral needs. And a wealth of scientific evidence shows that this is not the case for farrowing crates and stalls. Schedule 8 of the regs then states, and this is the schedule that's specific for pigs, a pig must be free to turn around without difficulty at all times. And so farrowing crates clearly violate both Schedules 1 and Schedule 8 of the Welfare of Farmed Animals regulations, as well as Section 9 of the Animal Welfare Act.
What's the situation in other countries with respect to farrowing crates?
Yeah, this is an important question on 2 counts, because first of all, the UK claims to be a global leader in animal welfare, and the UK is very much falling behind with farrowing crates because they've been banned in other countries. But also other countries have banned farrowing crates, and this shows, which we'll talk about later, that this is consistent with comparable levels of piglet mortality, which is the main justification for these crates. But to talk about the situation in other countries, Sweden banned crates in 1988, Norway banned crates in the year 2000, Switzerland banned crates in 97, effective from 2007. Germany has announced a partial ban on crates, which permits confinement for 5 days, and that's effective from 2035. Austria has a similar ban effective from 2033, a partial ban that permits crates around the critical period for piglets. And a New Zealand court has found farrowing crates to be unlawful, and that its Animal Welfare Act would need to be amended for the crates to be lawful. And this was based on a report by Professor Andrew Knight, now at Winchester University, produced for the NGO SAFE in New Zealand. And based on that court decision, the New Zealand government announced the phase out of crates by 2025. And finally, the European Commission has announced it will phase out all cages, and this includes farrowing crates, by 2027.
Well, that's really good news. What are the alternatives to farrowing crates then?
So, of course, if we argue that farrowing crates don't meet the welfare needs of sows and mean that sows can't have a life worth living, then we need to have alternatives if society consumes pig meat. And there are alternatives, and 5 alternatives I list in my report. First of all, outdoor systems. Secondly, zero confinement designed pens. Thirdly, temporary crating. Fourthly, group systems, and fifthly, kennel and run systems. And in the UK, 60% of sows farrow indoors. That's 200,000 sows, which we're concerned about. but 40% of our national herd farrows outdoors. And experts in farrowing systems, scientific experts have actually labeled outdoor systems as the gold standard. And this is because pigs have a much more complex environment. They have a lot more freedom. They can root and dig in the soil. They can move away from their piglets as they need to. They can interact with other sows and they can interact with their piglets. Indeed, the welfare is very much likely better for the piglets themselves because they can explore their environment, interact with other piglets from different litters and so on. And so secondly, in terms of zero confinement design pens, the UK government, DEFRA, has actually funded research which was conducted at the Scottish Rural College and Newcastle University. And this research involved the designing of a pen which was based on the biological and welfare needs of sows and piglets. And this pen was called Pig Safe, meaning piglet and sow alternative farrowing environments. And these pens tends to be bigger, so farrowing crates are within a pen of about 4 meters squared. The pig safe pen and similar designed pens tend to be 5 to 8 meters squared, and they have separate areas for sows and piglets. And they also have so-called pen furniture like sloped walls to reduce the risk of crushing. But importantly, in these pens, they have a hard, solid surface that we can put straw in so that the sow can build a nest. And also areas where the stock people can separate the pig to manage the piglets, for example.
I mean, you've touched upon this. It's implicit in many of the answers that you've given to these questions, but the pig industry has claimed that farrowing crates are necessary, and that's to prevent piglets from being crushed. What did your report find about that argument? Is it a legitimate position to say we need to prevent piglets from being crushed, and so we need to restrict them at that particular time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really the crux of the issue, because the pig industry has long argued that farrowing crates are necessary to maintain lower levels of piglet mortality. The pig is, I think, about 1,000 times bigger than her piglets. You know, there's a real risk of crushing due to that size difference, and especially if we keep pigs in such an enclosed environment. Actually, you know, the argument is very problematic, and my report finds it very much unfounded. And well-managed alternative farrowing systems can produce comparable, and in many cases actually lower, better piglet mortality rates. And there's three main pieces of evidence, if you like. So first of all, in the UK, and remember we said that 40% of the national herd farrows outdoors in the UK, the mortality rate for outdoor farrowing in the UK is 11.9%. And this compares to a higher mortality for indoor farrowing, 13.2%. Secondly, the pig safe systems funded by DEFRA, which again I've talked about, has comparable mortality rates to the use of the crate. And thirdly, commercial data, and I think personally this is the most striking piece of evidence, commercial data from other countries. So for example, Switzerland banned crates in 2007, and Switzerland has again a lower live piglet mortality rate. This is figures cited in 2022 in a 2022 report by Emma Baxter. Figures in Switzerland 11.1% compared to 12.2% in the UK, so again lower. And Norway as well has lower figures, 12% versus 12.2% in the UK. And these are both countries that have full complete bans on farrowing crates.
Now, that is really interesting. And your report concludes that farrowing crates should be banned. Can you explain the arguments for this?
Yeah, so I think there are three arguments for the banning of farrowing crates. And the first one is simply that crates can't meet the welfare needs of sows. They can't and they don't meet the welfare needs of sows. And this means that sows cannot, again, and do not have a life worth living in these systems. And I would argue it's very, difficult to see how they could have a life worth living, all things considered, given that they're in these systems for over 20% of their breeding lives, and the longer term impacts that such confinement will have. And essentially, no farming system should continue if it doesn't meet the welfare needs of the animals that are living in it. And this is the basic principle behind the Animal Welfare Act and the welfare needs that we outlined in earlier in Section 9 of the Act. So secondly, again, what we've just talked about, the pig industry claims that crates are necessary to reduce piglet mortality, but this is really a smokescreen. The evidence is clearly there from UK outdoor farming, from designed pens like PigSafe, and from other countries like Switzerland and Norway, that we can have comparable and lower piglet mortality. And thirdly, and this is a very important key point, farrowing crates were actually used initially in the 1960s and 70s just for 2 or 3 days. And over time, the pig industry has used them for longer and longer periods, such that the sows are now crated, severely confined for duration of 5 weeks. But the critical period for the crushing of piglets is actually 3 days, 72 hours after farrowing, and we have these sows in there for 5 weeks. And so based on the unnecessary suffering principle, we can argue there's certainly a lot of suffering. The science tells us this, but even if it were necessary to keep the sows in any crate at all for 3 days, which is problematic in itself, there certainly would be no justification to keep them in crates for 5 weeks.
And in your report, you write that there must be a full ban on farrowing crates and legislation should not permit the use of temporary crates. Can you explain why that is?
So I think, again, the basic vision and conception of a crate shows how severe the confinement and the severe the degree of restriction of behavior of these sows, normal natural behaviors, and lots of scientific evidence shows us the problems, the stresses that this caused to the sows. And I think this is all widely known. We've banned sow stalls, complete ban on sow stalls in the UK from 99, partial ban in the European Union, lots of scientific evidence of the problems with the degree of confinement. So this is all quite well known, and indeed the government has signalled its intention to ban crates in its 2020 DEFRA guidance on the welfare of pigs. And I think that the pig industry knows that the writing is on the wall for crates, but for this reason, the pig industry is currently lobbying for the use of temporary crates. And temporary crates are crates that have been designed to permit the temporary crating of sows. So in their closed position, they cause the same degree of restriction or confinement as the traditional crate. But when they're open, the sow has a little bit more mobility, and this depends on the design. But the idea is that the sow is crated during the critical period around farrowing. But the problem with these crates, there's a number of problems. First of all, the crates are designed with not the temporary crates aren't designed with the biological and welfare needs of the sow and piglets in mind. So in many cases, their area won't be sufficient. Related to this, evidence is now actually showing that temporary crates may be associated with higher rates of piglet mortality compared to genuine free farrowing crates like PigSafe. And also, there's a real problem with enforcement here. Good legislation, as we know, should be enforceable, and there will be no way For instance, if a law was passed that banned crates apart from the temporary use for 5 days, there will be no way to enforce this, and therefore it will be poor legislation. And finally, the British public increasingly rejects cages in farming. You can look at the battery cage issue in chickens for an example of this, where the British public has largely rejected colony cages or enriched cages. And if the pig industry were to continue with temporary crates, it would still have a cage at the heart of its enterprise, and this would really not be a good move commercially.
That's really interesting. So what are the recommendations in your report?
Yeah, so five recommendations for the report. First of all, a complete ban on farrowing crates. The report was published back in May or so of this year, and it stated that we should ban farrowing crates because it's such an urgent issue. These crates cannot meet the welfare needs of sows. The sows cannot have a life worth living. The ban should happen in the 2022-23 parliamentary session, for example, under the Kept Animals Bill. Secondly, there should be a 5-year transition to zero confinement free farrowing. So we need to give the pig industry some time, limited time, to transition to free farrowing. And a ban which had been implemented, fully enforced by 2027, would also be consistent with the EU's ban of cages by 2027. Thirdly, the half of the cost to transition to free farrowing should be borne by the government under the animal health and welfare pathway, and this will be under the public money for public goods principle. The crate is a perfect example of where public money is justified. All of the costs, the non-monetary costs, are externalized to the sow. The public very much do not agree with such levels of confinement, and we now have the Agricultural Act passed in 2020. We have the opportunity to have our own agricultural policy and to fund such reforms in agriculture. Fourthly, as discussed, the policy must be zero confinement free farrowing, not temporary crating of sows. And finally, the UK government must also ensure the equivalence of core welfare standards for imports, and this will ensure a level playing field for British farmers, but it would also help to drive reform in the welfare of the pig industry abroad.
And thank you for coming to talk to us about these issues today. Your report is extremely informative and an influential one. Is there any campaigning currently undergoing to have these crates banned?
Yeah, so this report was commissioned by the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, and in November of this year, 2022, the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation have launched a campaign called Escape the Crate, and this campaign is also supported by Compassion in World Farming and Humane Society International UK.
Well, that's really good to hear. So if our listeners want to get involved, if they want to be part of that conversation, they can contact any of those groups, and hopefully we'll see some action in the near future. So thank you very much, and it's been really interesting to talk to you about all these issues today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from. And if you give us a good review, it will help others to find us. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss a show.
For more information about the work of the UK Centre for Animal Law, please go to www.alaw.org.uk.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.